Imagine being one of the most famous men in the world. You have money, connections. People know your name everywhere you go. And then your phone rings. Your 19-year-old son has disappeared. Frank Sinatra was used to being the man in control. But in December of 1963, control was suddenly in someone else's hand. Before we get into the story, you have to understand who Frank Sinatra Jr. was. The name is important here. And I just don't mean his name, I mean his father's name. By 1963, Frank Sinatra was one of the biggest entertainers in the world. Singer, actor, Oscar winner. His face was recognizable. His voice was unmistakable. And his son, Frank Sinatra Jr., was trying to build a music career of his own. Think about that for a second. You're 19 years old. You're trying to prove yourself. And your father is Frank Sinatra. Every room you walk into, people are already having an expectation of you. Every performance is going to be compared to him. Every opportunity is going to be questioned. But did you earn it? Or did your last name get you there? Frank Jr. was still at the beginning of that journey. And in December 1963, he was performing at the Harrah's Club Lodge in Lake Tahoe. He had no idea two young men had been following him from city to city, waiting, watching, trying to find the right moment. And on December 8th, they believed they had finally found it. Barry Keenan and Joe Amsler, both 23 years old, former high school classmates from Los Angeles. For weeks, according to the FBI, they had been tracking Frank Jr.'s movements. Their idea was simple: kidnap the son of a wealthy celebrity, demand money, collect it, and disappear. And this is where I want you to think about human behavior, because from the outside, we sometimes look at crimes like this and assume the people involved must have thought through every possible scenario. But planning can create a dangerous kind of confidence. You sit in a room, you talk about what you're going to do, you imagine the money, you imagine the getaway. And because everything works in your imagination, you start believing it will work in real life. But real people don't always follow the script. Police don't always follow your script. Your partners don't follow your script. And fear definitely doesn't follow your script. On the evening of December 8th, Keenan and Amsler were ready. Frank Jr. was resting with a friend at the lodge. Around 9 p.m., there was a knock at the door. Keenan pretended to be delivering a package. The door opened, and within moments, the situation changed. Keenan and Amsler entered. Frank Jr.'s friend was restrained and taped. Frank Jr. was blindfolded. Then the kidnappers moved him through the side door and into a waiting car. The plan was now real. And almost immediately, something went wrong. Frank Jr.'s friend managed to free himself. He then called the police. Roadblocks began going up, and somewhere on the road, Keenan and Amsler were driving with one of the most recognizable names in America inside their vehicle. The kidnappers were stopped by the police. But then the men managed to lie and bluff their way through the stop. Police allowed the vehicle somehow to continue, and they drove on toward a hideout that they had in the Los Angeles area. Now, imagine being Frank Jr. in that car. You're blindfolded, you know the police are there, they're close. Maybe this is the moment you're going to be found. And then the car starts moving again. Whatever hope you had in that moment is gone. By 9:40 p.m. that night, the FBI office in Reno had been brought into the case. Agents met with Frank Sinatra and Frank Jr.'s mother, Nancy. The FBI believed the motive was probably money. Their advice to the Sinatra family was difficult, but they had a strategy. Wait for the ransom, whatever the demand is, pay it. Then allow the investigators to follow the money. So Frank Sinatra waited. And the next day, another man came into the story. His name was John Irwin. Now, Irwin's role was critical. He was going to act as the ransom contact. So he called Frank Sinatra and told him to wait for further instructions. Now, put yourself in Frank Sinatra's shoes. Your son is somewhere out there with some strangers, God knows where, you don't know where, and you don't know what condition he's in. And the only connection you have to him is this voice on a telephone. What would you do? Would you trust the FBI strategy? Or would you, every instinct inside you say, hey, I have to do something immediately? On December 10th, the demand finally came. $240,000. Frank Sinatra gathered the money. The cash was turned over to the FBI and the agents photographed it. The money could now be identified. Investigators found it later on. But first, the ransom had to be delivered. In the early morning hours of December 11th, the money was taken to Sepulveda, California. The instructions led to two school buses. The ransom was left between them. $240,000 just sitting there in the darkness waiting to be collected. Keenan and Amsler moved in for the money, and while they were doing that, something was happening in the back hideout, something they were not planning for. John Irving was getting nervous. And this is the part of the story that really fascinates me because fear can completely change a group. When everything feels safe, people can sound confident. Everybody agrees. Everyone is committed. But once the consequences become real, you start finding out who can actually live with the decisions that they have made. Irwin was feeling the pressure. And while Keenan and Amsler were collecting the ransom, Irwin made a decision. He released Frank Sinatra Jr. Frank Jr. was free, but he still had to find help. He walked several miles through the Bel Air until he found a security guard. And what happened next is going to sound almost unbelievable. The son of Frank Sinatra Jr. had just been released from a kidnapping. The press was absolutely desperate to find the information. So, to avoid reporters, the security guard placed Frank Jr. in the trunk of his patrol car and drove him to his mother's house, Nancy. Just imagine that scene. You survived the kidnapping. You walk through the night, you're looking for help, and now you're hiding in the trunk of a security vehicle because your father's name, his fame, has turned your return home into this big media event. Frank Jr. was safe, but for the FBI, the case was far from over because the men who took him still had the money, and the investigators needed to find them. Frank Jr. spoke with the FBI agents, but there was still a problem. He had been blindfolded. He had barely seen the two kidnapped. The third man was mostly a voice. So investigators began working with what they had. They followed the physical evidence. The FBI traced clues to the house in Canoga Park where Frank Jr. had been held. Investigators recovered evidence, including latent fingerprints connected to the items in the case. A fingerprint was found on the envelope recovered from a house rented by Amsler. Another latent print was found on a roll of adhesive tape connected to the restraint of Frank Jr.'s friend. Piece by piece, the case was tightening, and the kidnappers knew the FBI was getting closer. Reports about the investigation were appearing all over the press. Now imagine being one of the men being involved. You have the ransom money, the FBI is investigating, the victim is alive and talking, evidence exists, and you don't know what the other people in your group are thinking. Would you trust them? Because one of them was about to break. John Irving went to his brother. He told him about the kidnapping, and his brother contacted the FBI office in San Diego. According to later federal court records, Irwin personally spoke with the FBI by phone. He admitted he was connected to the Sinatra kidnapping. He said he had some of the ransom money and he wanted to surrender. When the FBI agents arrived, Irwin told them his share of the ransom was in the car. An attache case containing the cash was recovered. Irwin wanted to make what the court later described as a clean breast of the situation. And once he started talking, the investigation moved quickly. Within hours, Barry Keenan and Joe Amsler were captured. At Amsler's apartment, agents recovered approximately $168,500 connected to the ransom. Nearly all of the $240,000 was eventually recovered.